Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that deals with human development and psychology to help you figure that out. And now last time we were talking about Sigmund Freud and psychosexual development. We all kind of know he was kind of hung up on that a little bit. He might have had reasons. We ain't going to go into that. But we're going to take back up on that and talk about that. Newborns are governed by the id, which operates under the pleasure principle, the drive to seek immediate satisfaction of its needs and desires. And that's all you babies and even into toddlerhood you're interested in. You know, if you're hungry, you want to get fed. You know, if you're thirsty, you want to drink. If you've soiled yourself in your diaper, that's going to become uncomfortable, and you want someone to clean that up for you until you're able to do that for yourself. Then a whole nother war comes about, you know. And unfortunately, there are adult people who kind of regress back into that, and that's all they want taken care of is their, you know, immediate physical needs and wants and desires. When gratification is delayed, as it is when infants have to wait to be fed, they begin to see themselves as separate from the outside world. And that's because, you know, their needs are not being met right now. You know, everything else is going on along and fine, but yet they have this, you know, their belly's growling, they're waiting on their food, and that's, you know, very upsetting to the psyche. The ego, which represents reason, develops gradually during the first year or so of life and operates under the reality principle. Because, like I said, you know, if the reality is going on around them, they understand, oh, well, it's not all about me. There are other people and other things, and, you know, that's going to be part of my reality. But because that, you know, affects the ego, then the ego develops an ego, so to speak, you know. So you start to realize you are a separate entity, you are your own person, and you start to develop your personality, start working on who you want to be. The ego's aim is to find realistic ways to gratify the id, because, you know, we all want to get our needs met, and we all should get our needs met. So, you know, that plays an important part in that. The superego develops during early childhood. It includes the conscience and incorporates socially approved shoulds and should nots into the child's own value system. And that's important if you want to live in a society. Because there are people who have, you know, mental illnesses and disabilities and things, whose impulses should not be followed through on. And so it's important that we learn as we grow that if we want to live in a society, there are ways to behave. There are things that we should do, there are things we shouldn't do, and that there are consequences for doing things that we shouldn't do. If its standards are not met, a child may feel guilty and anxious. And this can happen when parents are too punitive. A child may have had no fault in something that happened, or they couldn't help what happened. It was done to them, or, you know, they could not control the situation, such as in school, the teacher would be in charge or whatever. And if the parent is punitive and guilts them about that, then they can feel guilty and anxious even when it's not their fault and there's nothing they could do about it. And I had to unprogram some of that myself, because as a child, I was not in charge of situations, you know, that happened to me in school, or, you know, if there was a bigger kid in the neighborhood that, you know, broke something of yours or scuffed your shoes or whatever. You were not in charge of that situation. So if you have overly punitive parents, you can develop some guilt and anxiety that really you didn't need to have. And then you're going to have to go talk to somebody and kind of purge all that and figure out, you know, that that's not even your baggage to be carrying. That was baggage that was given to you. The ego acts as a mediator between the impulses of the id and the demands of the superego, because there has to be balance. You know, we can't always have what we want, and neither should we be a total martyr and live only for others, depriving ourselves of everything. Then we will soon die. So there needs to be balance in your life. Freud's theory made historic contributions, and several of his central themes have been validated by research, though others have not. And we were talking about the, you know, biting personalities and the different types of personalities that he contributed to certain fixations. And of course that was proved not to be the thing. Freud made us aware of the importance of unconscious thoughts, feelings, and motivations, because these are what drive you, what's going on in your unconscious mind. We're not always aware of it. It's just feelings that pop up. You know, if you want to call it your emotions, the way your mind interprets and expresses your emotions. The role of childhood experiences in forming personality, the ambivalence of emotional responses, especially to parents, and ways in which early relationships affect later ones. The role of childhood experiences in forming your personality, and again, all of these experiences you had in childhood might not have been instigated from you. They may have been things that were given to you, and that's unfortunate, because later, usually we have to go and unpack that baggage. My personal belief is, once you're 18, when you transfer from a pediatrician to a regular MD, they should go ahead and schedule you a visit for therapy, and you just go and you unload. You know, like it used to be soldiers, after they come from, you know, combat or getting ready to leave service, they would be debriefed, and you would just tell about all the stuff that happened, and that was supposed to, you know, clear it out for you. I think as human beings, since no one's perfect, and our parents are certainly not perfect, and they probably did the best they thought they could do, but sometimes we leave home carrying a whole lot of baggage that isn't necessarily ours. So I think, yeah, as soon as you're an adult, you just schedule that first appointment for therapy and just unload that baggage. I think that would be great for everybody. And yeah, emotional responses, ambivalence of emotional responses, because not everybody's going to have the same response. If someone is a positive, happy person, they're going to have a different response than a, you know, negative, depressed person. So differing situations make different responses, and that's why the, you know, psychology of development is so individual to each different person, because everybody's different. And again, our parents like to pack some bags for us. That's all I'm going to say. And our earliest relationships affect our later ones. Your first relationships are with your parents. And they say the very first relationship is with your mother. And if that one's not right, it's going to mess up the rest of them for the rest of your life. So again, you know, like I said, I'm all for mandatory therapy. Because I think once you turn 18 and you got all the stuff, your parents, your family, your friends, people you knew in school, the bullies, the teachers that weren't so nice or whatever, you can just go unload that baggage and move on into your adulthood as a, you know, better, more well-adjusted person, learning how to deal with these things and purge these things and move on. I think it'd be great for everybody. Freud also opened our eyes to the presence from birth of sexual urges. There are young children who, will play with themselves, but that usually doesn't come until older children, develop. And that's, one of the things that they talk about, molested children don't think that feels good because they're not a sexual being yet. To them, it can be interpreted as pain. And of course, if an adult is doing things to you, that is painful. So a child is not a sexual being yet. But, an older child might start experimenting with things. Or toddlers, even toddlers, let's see, for lack of a better word, the hunching behavior. Toddlers will do that, put the teddy bear there, pillow there, whatever. So, that's not uncommon. Although many psychoanalysts today reject his narrow emphasis on sexual and aggressive drives, his psychoanalytic method greatly influenced modern-day psychotherapy. He did help to realize that, you do have a psyche and you do have a subconscious mind and unconscious mind. This is where stuff's going on that you're not quite aware of. You're aware of the stuff that's to the fore, but not what's going on in the back. And again, usually, there are people, places, and things that help to shape your personality that you might not even be aware of. Like I said, unpack them bags, baby. We need to remember that Freud's theory grew out of his place in history and in society, because he grew up in a time that they were kind of repressed, the sexual urges were not really talked about. And so, as a person who kind of grew up in that area, he might have not had, I don't know how to put this nicely, outlets for certain things. And so, that might have affected his attitude about some things going on. Freud based his theories about normal development not on a population of average children, but on a clientele of upper middle class adults, mostly women, in therapy. Because at that time also, women were not equal with men, and a woman might be anxious and stressed out. If the man was in charge of everything, she didn't know how much money they had. She didn't know what she could buy, what she couldn't buy, or what they were going to do in the future. She was basically thrust into a position of chattel. So women at the time were probably a lot more stressed out and depressed and anxious than the men were, because they were in charge of their own life. His concentration on the importance of sexual feelings and of early experience does not take into account other and later influences on personality, including the influences of society and culture, which many heirs to the Freudian tradition, notably Erikson, stress. Because, like I said, he got a little too hung up on the sexuality part. But the psychoanalysis that he came up was a good thing. And like the Erikson, when he came along, he started putting other things to that. Like, you're in your society and in your culture, there are certain norms of behavior. And this will also affect how you develop as a person. Okay, so now we're going to look at 5 perspectives on human development. We're going to look at the perspective, the important theories in it, the basic beliefs, the technique that's used, stage-oriented, yes or no, and causal emphasis, and it's whether it's active or passive individual. So the first is psychoanalytic. Freud's psychosexual theory and Erikson's psychosocial theory. Behavior is controlled by powerful unconscious urges. Personality is influenced by society and develops through a series of crises or crucial alternatives. clinical observations. It's stage-oriented. My gosh. Innate factors modified by experience. We got a wrinkle, you know how them wrinkle print things happen. That's crazy. Interaction of innate and experiential factors. Freud's theory was passive and Erikson's was active. Learning. Behaviorism or traditional learning theory, Pavlov, Skinner, and Watson. People are responders. The environment controls behavior. People learn in a social context by observing and imitating models. Person is an active contributor to learning. Rigorous scientific experimental procedures, not stage-oriented. The center emphasis is experience, and it is passive. Cognitive, Piaget's cognitive stage theory. Qualitative changes in thought occur between infancy and adolescence. Person is active initiator of development. Human beings are processors of symbols. Rigorous scientific experimental procedures, not stage-oriented, experience modified by innate factors, and it is active and positive. Evolutionary or socio-biological. Bowlby's and Ainsworth's attachment theory. Human beings have the adaptive mechanisms to survive. Critical or sensitive periods are stressed. Biological and evolutionary basis for behavior and predisposition toward learning are important. Laboratory research, technological monitoring of psychological responses, naturalistic and laboratory observation, not stage-oriented. The emphasis is on interaction of innate and experience factors, and it is active or passive based on whichever particular theory. Contextual, Bronfenbrenner's biological theory. Yeah, I like that one. Development occurs through interaction between a developing person and 5 surrounding, interlocking contextual systems or influences, from microsystem to chronosystem. Naturalistic observation and analysis, not stage-oriented. Interaction of innate and experiential factors, and it is active. Vygotsky sociocultural theory, that's another one I like. Sociocultural context is central to development. Cross-cultural research, observation of child interacting with more competent person, not stage-oriented. Its emphasis is on experience, and it isn't active. So those are your 5 perspectives on human development, based on, the theories of those particular people who worked on them. We're going to talk about developmental stages according to various theories. And why are these important? So that, you can know about them. And so that you can see which ones affected you the most. That's a good reason to learn about any theory, is how it affected you. Psychosexual stages by Freud. The oral stage was birth at 12 to 18 months. Baby's chief source of pleasure involves mouth-oriented activities, sucking and feeding. The anal, from 12 to 18 months, is 3 years. The child derives sensual gratification from withholding and expelling feces. Zone of gratification is anal region, and toilet training is important activity. The phallic, 3 to 6 years. Child becomes attached to parent of the other sex and later identifies with same-sex parent. Superego develops. Zone of gratification shifts to genital region. Latency, 6 years to puberty. Time of relative calm between more turbulent stages. And genital, puberty through adulthood. Reemergence of sexual impulses of phallic stage. Channeled into mature adult sexuality. So that was Freud's theory of psychosexual development. Psychosocial stages by Erikson. Basic trust versus mistrust, birth to 12 to 18 months. Baby develops sense of whether world is a good and safe place. And virtue is hope. Because if you take care of the child, if you feed it when it's hungry, if you change it when it's wet, the child learns that the world is a good and safe place and its needs are going to be met. If you make the child cry it out in another room and don't give him what he needs, what you're teaching the child is that the world is not a safe place. I cannot trust the world to help me meet my needs. So the world is a dark and scary place. So, you parents, if you're fans of that, put them in another room. No, you're wrong. And you're going to make your child have a very negative, scared outlook on the world. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. Ages 12 to 18 months to 3 years. Child develops a balance of independent and self-sufficiency over shame and doubt, as virtue is will. Initiative versus guilt. 3 to 6 years. Child development initiative when trying out new activities and is not overwhelmed by guilt. Virtue, purpose. So that's the big stage where they're wanting to learn. That's why they started preschool from, age 3 and 4 years old, whatever your school system calls it, because this is when the children want to learn. They are, big participants in their own education. Industry versus inferiority, 6 years to puberty. Child must learn skills of the culture or face feelings of incompetence. Virtue is skill. And unfortunately, there are teachers and parents who can damage a child's psyche in this time by telling them they are incompetent in some kind of way. They might not use that word, but that feeling comes across to a child if that's what is being told. Identity versus identity confusion. Puberty to young adulthood. Adolescents must determine own sense of self. Who am I? Or experience confusion about their roles. The virtue is fidelity. That, if you remember back to when you were starting into puberty, it was a confusing time, especially if you weren't, falling into the norm. And so this is something you have to work out at that stage and figure out who you are. And some people never really quite navigate that stage and they kind of go through life just lost, and that's a shame. Intimacy versus isolation, young adulthood. Person seeks to make commitments to others. If unsuccessful, may suffer from isolation and self-absorption. The virtue is love. Now, this is where a lot of people get stuck. A lot of people get stuck in this. They're trying to make, relationships with other people. They're trying to make commitments with other people. And if it doesn't work out so good, they can decide that, this sex is all bad. You hear a lot of sexist men and sexist women saying, all women are like this, all men are like this. Well, no, they're not. That one partner who upset you might have been, or if we go back far enough, it might have been your opposite sex parent who was, I don't know. But, you can't let one failed relationship or even 2 or 3 or more failed relationships color your view of all relationships. And so this is where a lot of people stop right here in their development, because they decide it's not worth it, to be in a committed relationship. They just have casual relationships. And that speaks to their developmental stage and their, compatibility with you if you want a serious relationship. And being in a relationship with these peoples, they, are going to have isolation and self-absorption issues. So they're not going to be a good partner for you because they're going to want their space, and it's all going to be about them, So, this is a bad place to stop developing. But unfortunately, a lot of people, go this little narcissistic route, and they use other people to meet their needs, but that's where that stops. Generativity versus stagnation, your middle adulthood. Mature adult is concerned with establishing and guiding the next generation, or else feels personal impoverishments, and the virtue is care. And even if you don't have children of your own, you can still teach other children. And and everybody has something they can teach. So as a mature adult, you are concerned with helping the next generation. Ego integrity versus despair in late adulthood. Elderly person achieves acceptance of own life, allowing acceptance of death, or else despairs over inability to relive life, and their virtue is wisdom. And if you got stuck at one of these previous stages, then this one is going to be worse on you. I used to work in a nursing home, and I've had family members and some in-laws now who are not ready to go, who are fighting it all the way. They don't think they had a good life. They're resentful and bitter. Oh, excuse me. And, they wish they could do more things. And so then, because they can't, they put it on other people. You need to do this for me. You need to, and that's not going to solve anything. But it's a reflection of the fact that they did not fulfill all their, needs. And they're still wanting. They're still lacking. They still have holes to fill. And that's sad. The cognitive stages by Piaget. Sensory motor, birth to 2 years. Infant gradually becomes able to organize activities in relation to the environment through sensory and motor activity. The pre-operational, 2 to 7 years. Child develops a representational system and uses symbols to represent people, places, and events. Like, they might have a block that they drive around as a car. Languages and imaginative play are important manifestations of this stage. Thinking is still not logical. So from 2 to 7 years, you can still think about things, and you can still have, representations for things, and you can come up with theories and hypotheses as a 7-year-old, but logical thinking is a little bit beyond you yet, because you don't know enough about how things actually work yet. Concrete operations, 7 to 11 years old. Child can solve problems logically if they are focused on the here and now, but cannot think abstractly. So, if you're presented with a problem that is in the here and now, and you can touch it, see it, whatever, you can think about how that needs to go. But if it's a random thing, they can ask you, well, what if, or whatever, that's going to be harder. I've seen interviews done with children of, young, about 6 or 7, and what would you think? And they're like, I don't know, because they don't. Formal operations, 11 years through adulthood. The person can think abstractly, deal with hypothetical situations, and think about possibilities. And there are some people who never quite get there, whether it's through a developmental delay, mental disability, or just they were severely abused and neglected as a child. Their thinking never quite gets there. And they're quite often shocked when things happen to them in the world. And again, that's kind of a sad thing. Erik Erikson, Psychosocial Development. Erik Erikson, a German-born psychoanalytic who originally was part of Freud's circle in Vienna, modified and extended Freudian theory by emphasizing the influence of society on the developing personality. Because we all grow up in a society, and how society is around us, and especially in that point in time, because, it changes over time, does affect how we grow and learn and develop. Erikson was a pioneer in a lifespan perspective, whereas Freud maintained that early childhood experiences permanently shape personality. And we know that's not true. It can for a while, but you can intervene and get help to change the way things are going for you. That's the good thing about being a human being. This big higher brain we got, it's easily wounded, but it's also easily helped if you know the right way to do it. Erikson contended that ego development is lifelong. He applied his own theory to well-known public figures, writing psychological biographies or psychohistories of Martin Luther and Mahatma Gandhi. Erikson's theory of psychosocial development covers 8 stages across the lifespan, which we will discuss. Each stage involves what Erikson originally called a crisis in personality, a major psychosocial theme that is particularly important at that time and will remain an issue to some degree throughout the rest of life. So, like I said, there's certain stages, like if you go into preschool at 3, then the issue at that point in time is for you to learn the alphabet. And then a later child might need to learn to write their name, learn, to do your sight words, learn to do your vocabulary words. Each step, there are things that you need to navigate in order to be successful in that stage. These issues, which emerge according to a maturational timetable, must be satisfactorily resolved for healthy ego development. Each stage requires the balancing of a positive tendency and a corresponding negative one. So again, life is all about the balance. There are certain outcomes that, will help you stay on the positive. There are certain outcomes that will help you stay on the negative. If your life is out of balance, that's problematic for you later on. Although the positive quality should predominate, some degree of the negative is needed as well, because that's how we learn. When we make mistakes, we learn. We do something wrong and we get punished for it, we learn. So some negativity is better, like we talked about the other day. If a child had the most perfect upbringing ever and was never scolded and told anything they did was ever wrong, then you'd have a totally spoiled, horrible person on your hands. The critical theme of infancy, for example, is basic trust versus basic mistrust. People need to trust the world and the people in it, but they also need to learn some mistrust to protect themselves from danger. And my little sister was very sheltered, because my parents ended up getting divorced, and so my mom kind of sheltered her a lot, and the grandmas kind of did the same. And so she was very trusting. I mean, she would talk to anybody. She didn't know a stranger. I mean, she walked out the road a couple times when she was a little kid. I mean, it was not good. So we need sometimes for our needs to not get met in order for us to realize, that wasn't good. I can't trust this person 100%, The successful outcome of each stage is development of a particular virtue or strength. In this case, the virtue of hope. Erikson's last stage in late adulthood is ego integrity versus despair. In this stage, one must come to terms with the way one has lived one's life, or succumb to despair over the inability to live it over. And this happens sometimes with older people. They might have lived their life in not such a good way. They aren't so happy with how it turned out. So then they do experience despair because there's nothing they can do about that. Their life is coming to an end, and they can't change anything and go back and do, something different. The virtue of this stage is wisdom. And, if we weren't given a good start in life, the good news is you can do that for yourself. Like I said, you can go to a therapist or a life coach. You can do some inner child work. You can love your inner child and hug them and tell them that you love them and you're going to be there for them now. And you can overcome. If your life balanced out with a lot more negative than positive the first 18 years, you can get help from a psychotherapist. and work through these things and unpack that baggage that your parents piled up on you, before you left the house. And family members and friends and the neighborhood bullies and mean teachers. You can unpack all that crap, leave it behind you so you can move forward into the life you want to live. And hopefully when you get to that stage, you won't have all those regrets and you won't be in despair, because you're like, I lived in my life the best I could, and I did a good job. So hopefully that has helped you think a little more about why you do what you do. Until next time.